All right, everybody. So today we have another Q&A with Abel Chabai. What's up, Abel?
Hey, it's all good. How is everything on your end?
I am tired and grumpy, dieting and getting bad sleep.
Yeah, diet, sleep. I know how that is.
Yeah, it's actually, I think last night was just an anomaly. So far, even with the very low calories, my sleep has been fine. But last night we were just talking about the temperature difference between my upstairs and downstairs is very significant. And so I'll be good down here. I'll go upstairs and it's like a furnace. So trying
Yeah,
to regulate that.
yeah.
So I think this will be kind of a long one. So we'll have part one here, Brains and Gains channel, and then make sure you guys go over to Abel's channel for part two. So we'll just
Indeed.
jump right into it. And remember, guys, anybody listening, if you want to have a question answered, usually a DM on Instagram is best. That's usually where I see most of them, but you can comment on YouTube as well. So let's see. From Mitja, if I'm saying that correctly. Hi, I listen to your podcast and have a similar approach to health and fitness as you. I lift 5 times per week, do 2 cardio sessions for cardiovascular fitness. Do you think cardio training 2 times per week in the 60 to 70% max heart rate and 10,000 steps is enough for cardiovascular health? How intense of cardio do you do? So I guess I'll probably leave this one because I need to into it. For you don't like cardio, I know that much. Neither do I, but
Yeah.
you know, it's a ton. So from what I've seen, there's you'll see some of these bodybuilders who think that I train legs really intensely and that's enough for cardio. And actually, I knew a guy who was probably 60, had a heart attack, thought he was fine. I mean, he worked out intensely, but he did a stress test. Actually, no, he might not have had a heart attack. He did a stress test and really had a poor performance on the stress test. Ended up having to get surgery. He's doing okay now. But in any case, I would definitely recommend if you're looking at just health, cardio is very important. If anything, I could make an argument for cardio being more important than weightlifting. Like you would obviously want to have both. But if you're already, let's say somebody was doing 2 intense strength training sessions per week and 2 cardio sessions per week, and they said, okay, what can I add more? I'd probably actually go with more cardio from a health standpoint once you have that basic level of strength. Um, like even the literature pretty strongly supports strength is more important for than muscle mass for longevity. So as long as you have that strength, then you want to go with cardio. Greg Knuckles and the Stronger by Science put out a paper recently talking about the risk of death. Like basically, mortality went down and down the more steps you had, and it really didn't seem to level off. I believe up to 16,000 steps per day, which is much more than most people get. Also, correlations with VO2 max and mortality, and so that's basically a marker of cardiovascular fitness. And VO2 max tends to go up more with higher intensity cardio. So I know even like despite the step literature, I would not ignore more intense bouts of cardio as well to make sure your VO2 max is high enough. So I don't know if I would give you a specific number of days per week, but I would say I would recommend most people to be getting 8 to 10,000 steps per day, which I will say I personally do not get every day, but it would be my recommendation, and to do a few higher intensity sessions of cardio as well.
So actually, I don't have anything to add to that. Like, if someone asked me this, I just would have said for fat loss and those things, like you don't need to do high intensity cardio, but for cardiovascular health, probably it's a good idea. So, but instead of adding anything, can I just ask some follow ups to that because I'm interested in this. So, if someone had, so first of all, high intensity cardio and I just assumed that when you said that it probably is more important than weightlifting, even for health, I just assumed that you meant high intensity there as well because of the cardio benefits.
Well, so what I mean by more important, again, and I would never want to minimize the importance of strength training. I'm just saying I think you could get most of the benefits for most people in terms of bone density and muscle mass and strength with even 2 days per week. But I do think you need more cardio than that. But yes, I think higher intensity definitely has importance there because most people can perform low intensity cardio and not realize that there's a problem going on, right? As the example I mentioned. Whereas like when you do a stress test, you have to push to higher. I mean, if you have arterial blockage, or if you just have a very low VO2 max. If you have a VO2 max of 30, let's say, and you probably want it to be closer like mid 40s, depending on age, you probably won't notice that with daily living. But if you were to do high intensity cardio, you'd be aware, oh, wow, like I can't even run, let's say, an 8-minute mile, or, I can't go more than, even just, sexual activity, things like that. I get winded. So things like that, I think it would be important to be aware of it.
And when it comes to intense, like higher intensity cardio, like how high do you think that intensity needs to be?
I'd probably have to peruse the literature again, but if you look at like intervals where you're actually supposed to be going to a near maximal effort, has shown to be better for VO2 max performance or increases than steady state cardio. So if somebody would say, hey, I'm going to run at like 75% of my max heart rate, and I'm just going to do that for 30 minutes, or I'm going to do sprints for 8 minutes. I believe most literature would comport with the latter having better increases in one's VO2 max.
Right. Yeah, just because like I actually did it for a while last year. Like I had a period where I did intervals. I remember even like writing to you sometimes, like asking like, how do you typically do it? And I just really wish I could just find a modality that I would just not hate so much. Like, how are those stationary bikes called? Like you kind of lean over and like you ride as hard as you can. Anyway, but so that one is by far the most convenient way to do it, I think, because it's just so well controllable and safe. Like you're not going to. It's very hard to injure yourself that way, and also it's just like a very straightforward method. But man, like just the sheer physical pain that I'm in while I'm doing it, it's just like every part of my being is just in discomfort, and it's just like so I just don't know. I mean, probably like the doctor would have to tell me like, look, you either do this twice a week or you're gonna die. Like the first week you don't do it,
man. I hate intervals because I do intervals twice a week, and I do it for consistency, and I think there are benefits, and I agree for like fat loss and whatnot, definitely not necessary. But I try to mix it up. I'll do stairs. I'll do like the Stairmaster, bike, battling ropes, running, elliptical. It's hard for me to get my heart rate as high on a bike as running, for instance. Like when I first started running and was trying to do like 6-minute miles, I was getting up to 180. I think I even hit 184 beats per minute. Whereas on a bike, it's pretty hard for me to get it past 165 because muscularly you're just limited. And also just like the burn there is intense. So, and I'm talking like I do like 6 to 8 sprints for 30 seconds. So if you actually look at the net time per week, you're talking 10 to 15 minutes of hell. But that to me is more mentally daunting than, okay, I have an hour-long workout to do. So I totally get it.
Yeah. And it's, I really wish, and we talked about this a lot, like some cool sport that we could pick up, because that would, I would guess that a box, like any kind of martial artist, but like a boxer, for example, like it's, I did boxing for a while when I was in my teens. And I just remember how insanely like cardio intensive that is. So someone who is like doing these 12-round fights as a professional, they must be in incredible cardiovascular shape. It's just like really hard to find something that is either not going to break your face in 1,500 pieces or mess up your joints, like soccer, for example. So.
Yeah, sports would be a great way to do it. And there are some lifelong sports that like tennis, but we talked about before, most sports, it's unfortunately, it takes a lot of time. You could say, hey, I'm just going to do this for half an hour, but the main reason I don't do it, one, a much higher injury potential with most sports, right? You're almost never going to get injured from just cycling. And two, in terms of the time, okay, I'll literally take 15 minutes after a workout and do it. Versus I used to have fun playing racquetball and tennis, but it's like, okay, this is now an hour out of my day to go do this. So if you have the time, it's great. A lot of people doing jujitsu these days. there's plenty of options. So if you have a sport that you like, then fantastic. I think the average, when I was looking more onto a VO2 max, I think average college soccer players had VO2 maxes in like the high 50s, which is great for most people. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a viable option.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Hey, Doc, recently found your podcast. Forgive me if you've answered this. I'm looking into TRT, levels tested around 300 nanograms per deciliter 4 years ago, but I want to be responsible about it. How can someone find a doctor that's both open to prescribing TRT, but also not going to just give it to me because I asked? Seems it's always one or the other. I want to prioritize my health long term. Any insight would be great. So I know more and more you have these clinics and whatnot that pop up. I know Derek from More Plates, More Dates has his whole thing. I don't know anything about his, so I really can't make a recommendation. Seems like a decent guy, seems like a knowledgeable guy, but I don't know. There are a few well-known TRT doctors online. Like there's like the anabolic doc / metabolic doc, Dr. Thomas O'Connor. He's been on the podcast 2 or 3 times now. He seems great. But it is tough. I mean, I think it's more open nowadays. I wouldn't go, generally speaking, I wouldn't go to your primary care doctor because I think most of them are not going to know about it. And I would kind of interview your doctor. I would say, do you prescribe it to people? I would go to an endocrinologist over a urologist. Urologists often, actually, probably more urologists prescribe. I believe I remember reading that statistic than endocrinologists. Regardless of who you go to, though, I would vet them and say, how often, like, do you have a lot of patients on it? You know, you don't want somebody who's just saying, well, okay, well, your blood work is showing lower testosterone, so let's try it out. I would also kind of, again, test them and see what they want you to get tested. For example, if you said, hey, I have low testosterone, and if they're hopefully at least reasonable, they'll retest you. They won't just say, oh, you have low testosterone, let's get you on there. Obviously, if they say that, that's ridiculous. But then see what they test. If they just test your total testosterone, that's probably an indicator that they are not very experienced in that area, right? They should be saying, okay, we're going to test your total testosterone, your free testosterone, and maybe some utility to bioavailable testosterone, but you get most of it from the first 2 I mentioned, your estradiol, your sex hormone binding globulin, things like that, and probably just over other hormonal panels as well, thyroid hormone. Like they should be really doing a whole workup on you. And if you're not seeing that, I would potentially steer clear of them and go with somebody who has more experience. So obviously, I can't give you specific doctor names other than what I mentioned, but that would be, I think, a good way to vet them out. All right, go to the next one. All right, Abel, I don't know the order of these, so some of them might not be as relevant for you.
Okay, now pick something interesting. Just kidding.
All right, cool. This is good for both of us. Hey, Dave, found your channel a few weeks ago. Have been binging your interview series like crazy. I really enjoy your attitudes towards training and life. I know that you prefer training with higher intensity, and I was wondering if you have ever programmed using the top set / Backoff set approach for your clients. If you have, how did you choose rep ranges and proximity to failure for both sets? Thanks so much for the content. It's a joy to listen to. All right, you want to go on this one, Abel?
So top set and then Backoff set. So by that, does he mean, I never know, like, but people use these so differently. Mm-hmm. Backoff set is so the load is being dropped, or
generally, yeah. You take the weight off. Maybe you do higher reps. He says, how do you choose rep ranges and proximity to failure for both sets?
Right. So I think if you want to use that method, I think it's just good to generally observe your general tendencies. And that's something that I try to do with clients. For example, some people drop off a lot if they just leave the weight on the bar. But most people tend to drop off by like 1 or 2 reps per set if they rest a normal amount. But there are some people who drop off a lot. And I think that kind of gives you an indication for a bunch of things. For example, if you're using this and you're the kind of person who tends to drop off a lot, then you probably would have to drop the load quite a bit if you wanted to stay within like a certain rep range. And then obviously the same applies to like not leaving the weight on the bar. It's just like leaving the weight on the bar is my default method. But you can just try out like how much do you need to drop, let's say after 3 minutes of rest, to only, or to let's say to stay at the same reps or to get an extra rep. I think for most people, after a set, like if they drop the load by about like 10% or so, that will get them one extra rep. Or does this sound about right? I'm not sure,
because the first set.
Yeah. So like, let's say you have 6, you get 6 reps in the first set, then you rest like what you would normally rest. You drop it by 10%, and then you would get like an extra rep. I think that's about right, but I'm not sure because I haven't
exercise, but I probably get more than that. I feel like because I'm better at reps. So like if I did 245 for 8 bench or something, and then I drop that by 25 pounds, maybe like 1 or 2 more.
Yeah. I think that's kind of like 10-15%, 1 or 2 more reps. I think like that's roughly average. Reason I'm not completely sure is because I don't use it a lot, and actually I might as well say why not. I think there is something to be said for not dropping the load and leaving it on, because it allows for, like, yes, of course there are benefits to dropping the load because it is more joint friendly and things like that. But on the other hand, leaving the weight on the bar allows you to actually drop off in reps and thereby auto-regulating your volume more, if we, in this case, measure volume in just tonnage, so volume load. And I think there are some benefits to that. And in a way, reducing the weight kind of artificially keeps the volume higher. So that's something to consider. That said, I think it's totally fine to drop the load as well, and there are benefits to that too. But that's roughly what I would say. If someone could make out of what I said a lot of things. Then.
Yeah. So I do like the method. I don't use it for all of my clients, especially if somebody's like brand new, but I do often use it for myself. It really depends on the exercise. I like it because sometimes I do like to use a little bit of a looser form. You could say it's an ego thing. I think it just depends. Like if you look at somebody like Jeffrey Verdi Schofield, most of his sets, from what I've seen, are what I would consider looser form. But and again, I'm just thinking of some of the Instagram posts I've seen, so I'm not sure about all of his sets. Or if you see what I post on my Instagram, like with my pull-ups and whatnot, I'll usually show examples of both. But when I did 100 pounds for 6 reps, I'm not taking a 5-second eccentric and then pausing, right? I'm going pretty quickly because I want to see what I can get. Same thing with overhead press, all of that. But then I will say, okay, now I'm going to back off a little bit and lower the weight and then do really strict form. So if it's an exercise that I care more about the strength and I'm interested to see what my performance is, then I do more of that. And also just again for more volume with the Backoff sets. If it's an exercise like a chest supported row or something like that, that I'm just putting in there for more volume and hypertrophy purposes, I may still do it, but I will often just do straight sets or even just do like a rest pause set. So like my home workout on Tuesdays is pretty much all rest pause sets because it's exercises that I'm not really trying to get. Like I don't really care about the strength as much, right? It's a seated dumbbell curl. It's an overhead tricep extension. It's a weighted decline push-up. So I'm not really trying to get the maximum. But for a lot of like the big movements, I do actually like the Backoff method quite a bit.
Yeah, I think so. Actually, there are like 2 movements in my own routine where I do it, and those are big movements for sure. And those are also where like movements where form tends to break down quite a bit if you go very heavy. And that I think pulls generally fall into that category. But I still want to do some heavy work because I just because it's good for strength development, and I think in the long term that will have some benefit for muscle growth as well. And so what I will do sometimes is I do like 1 set, like pretty heavy, and then I will kind of drop back to just a more moderate level. And maybe, like you said, my form is not going to be the most pristine on that really heavy set. But then I can just do more like bodybuildery sets after that, where I think it doesn't make as much sense as if you're doing a movement where like let's say you do like a set of 12 or 15 or something like that on like a machine press or something like that.
Yeah.
Like after that, dropping it down wouldn't make as much sense. But yeah.
Yeah, for sure. All right. And that kind of answered the last part of his question where he said, how do you choose the rep ranges? So, and proximity to failure. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be doing this with high rep sets. I would be doing it with like something I'm trying to go heavier. And generally that first one is pretty close to failure. The second, for me, it's usually a top set and then 2 Backoff sets. So those Backoff sets they could be to failure depending on where I am in my mesocycle and how I'm training, but it's usually a little bit further from failure than the first set. So, All right. Here's an odd one. As a fellow guy, should I focus on like fats versus carbs? And sorry, this is by Tyler. More in regards to trying to get my testosterone back up. Like, do you have advice how to really work on that increasing test? And also,
so what, fats or carbs?
Basically, yeah, for increasing testosterone. Do you have any tips on gut health? Do you do or take anything? All right, so that's a little all over the place. Do you want to have any thoughts there, Abel? You want to go into it?
So, so the answer I'm going to give is probably going to be an answer that anybody could give, like, but who has like any nutritional knowledge. So, not an expert in this, but I like fats are important. I don't know. So I know that there is like a dose response, but like it tapers off like pretty early. So like it is not like if you go on like a keto diet, it's gonna be markedly better than just having normal amounts of fats in a mixed diet. So you don't want to be on a very low fat diet. And okay, so if I had to pick between being like a super low carb and high fat like keto type diet, or vice versa, I would pick the high fat diet for good test levels. But I think there's also some research on like very low carb diets tend to be not amazing. And by far the worst is like being on a high protein and low everything else diet. And I think there are even some specific numbers about like carb to protein ratio in your diet and test levels. So it's interesting that they've looked at carbs and not fat in that case. But yeah, so I think in that case, like just a pretty standard, like mixed, like quote unquote balanced diet. Yeah. If I had to bet on something, what do you think?
Yeah, it's not something I have people worry too much about. I mean, if your fat is really low, people often say below 30, 40 grams per day, then it's a problem. It's something that, as Abel mentioned, I mean, if you're getting the minimum, you're getting, 50, 60 grams of fat per day, you have some cholesterol in your diet, which again, obviously there's vegans who have no cholesterol, but seems like in general, you want the support for testosterone production. Beyond that, it's not something I would really worry about too much. And then carbs only in the sense that it might correlate with a deficit. So obviously the larger deficit you are in for the longer period of time, the more your testosterone is potentially going to drop, right? I mean, pretty much every male, if they got contest lean, would have lower testosterone levels. So in that sense, yes, lower carbs with lower calories is going to correlate with lower testosterone. But it's really not something I have people worry too much about. Not that it could make a difference. Obviously, if you're really deficient in something, it could be a problem. But if you're eating just a balanced diet, like Abel said, I really don't put too much focus on it. And if you're concerned about it, get your testosterone levels checked and you can see. And then you can start working on other things as well, like sleep and stress. But I wouldn't be like fat loading to try to increase testosterone. And then as far as the gut health, man, I mean, I'm sure you've heard experts talk about this, but it's one of those things that even the experts aren't sure exactly what is ideal for gut health. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that you should have these ideal things. I mean, you got people from carnivore diet saying it, which I do find interesting, that they will have a seeming improvement in their quote unquote gut health and in their how they feel. And like a lot of people who have digestive issues and even inflammatory bowel disease seem to have an improvement from ketogenic diets and carnivore diets. but the general recommendation would be to eat plenty of fiber and fruits and vegetables. And obviously, if you have IBD or IBS, symptomatically that could cause some problems, but I've never seen anything to indicate that it actually causes health issues. So again, I would keep it pretty basic, just because, not because I don't have other thoughts on it, but more just it's really not an area that anybody, I would say, completely knows what they're talking about. I think even I heard Eric Helms and Eric Trexler talk about how the variation in gut microbiota between an individual, like one individual at different parts of the day, was significantly more than the variation between individuals. So it's like, all these studies saying, oh, well, healthy people had more of this bacteria and that bacteria. It's like, okay, but was it just that time of the day, or what they ate, yesterday, or how they slept? So basically, I wouldn't get too in the weeds beyond, again, the basics. And I hate to give such a simple answer, but I really do think for most people that is the answer at this point.
Yeah. If I will just add like one thing, which is not going to be this scientific. It's going to be just an observation. It's very hard. Like sometimes clients ask me about gut health stuff, and what I realized over time is that it's pretty hard to give advice to people on this, because just like with hunger and just like with injuries like niggles and feelings in the gym, people have different standards for how they want their gut to function. And like some people are just complaining about, I don't know, like bloating and some little things that can go on with their gut, which I would say for most people is just like totally normal, and I would say rightfully so. Like I don't think like some people have such high standards for like they always want their stomach to be like completely flat, like never any like gas production or whatever. Like not to be gross here, but like these things to some extent is normal. Like I've seen it with a lot of people who did carnivore diets for a longer time, especially. I mean, they have such high standards for that kind of stuff. Like if their stomach is like even like the slightest bit distended, they're like, ooh, this is like it's crazy, the bloating and everything. So it's just tough to say, because like I can say something that worked really well for me, and it did, but for them it just doesn't cut it because their standards are so high. And then when I realized it, I actually got like just hopeful that people are not going to be asking me that much, because like, man, advising people on that is just no pun intended, but a complete shit show.
Yeah, right. Do either of you think there is a per session training stimulus that must be achieved within that given session in order to see gains in hypertrophy? In other words, as you become more advanced, do you think there is a necessary amount of volume one must do within a given session rather than spreading it out across the week? For example, is it possible that one could experience faster gains by doing 3 sets in one session rather than one set spread out over 3 days throughout the week?
I heard this same exact question on Brian's podcast yesterday. I was listening to Brian and Aaron's podcast, and it was asked there.
That might have been sent to me, and then I sent it to Brian because they were also doing a Q&A. So I guess we'll just answer it. I don't know what Brian's answer was, so we can just answer it. And it's funny, somebody else was just posting on my video. I think it was the one with Candido. I did one recently, and they were saying that, and I can get into it. Basically, they said, well, if there's an ideal amount, some people will say there's an ideal amount per session. And because of that, you can't just spread it out. You have to at least have, let's say, 8 sets per session, 10 sets, whatever it is. This person, I think, was arguing that you would want less because you could recover more. So they'd say, oh, maybe you should only do one really hard set. And then that way you can recover faster and then do another really hard set like the next day, which would be literally the opposite, obviously. So do you want to go into your answer, Abel?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because this is actually pretty short. But if I had to put my money on it, if there was like, okay, we are going to do an actually like well-controlled study on this, where technique and everything will be ensured that all, like that's the same between the two groups, the like how warmed up and ready they are to perform is the same. and it's going to be so long enough to measure muscle growth, blah, blah. I would put my money on that it doesn't matter. That's what I would think. I think in the real world, it probably would matter. For example, if someone would just do one set, I think that would be inferior, but I think it's because of real world stuff and not because of mechanistic stuff, and some practicality stuff as well. Because so if you did like one set 7 days a week, even for some people, it would be too little volume. But those things aside, I think, for example, just being warmed up enough, your technique being grooved in enough. I think if you warm up properly, with enough focus on the technique and some like 1 or 2 reps with a high enough percentage of your working weight, if you did enough of those things, then I think it wouldn't be any worse. But I think in practice, most people are just too sloppy with that. But I think if it was well controlled, I think you would get the same results. That's what I would put my money on personally.
Yeah, it's funny because in theory, if I wasn't aware of the literature at all, I could absolutely see there needing to be a per session volume, right? Like if you were to look at going back to VO2 max performance or cardiovascular performance, if you were to say, well, hey, what if you just did one 30-second sprint 7 days a week? I do not think that would be as good as doing 7 sprints in a row, just for like performance, because you would never get to a certain heart rate, right? You would you'd only get up to, even if I did one all out sprint 30 seconds, maybe I'd hit 140, and I will watch my heart rate go up each time I do another interval. So I think you would just never hit that point that you need to get to. I think there's a lot of examples of that where it's just not sufficient. But that is almost like saying, like, well, what if I just did 2 reps and then 2 reps and 2 reps instead of a 14 rep set? The reason I think it's different here is because each set you are getting to the maximum amount, right? The maximum effort, I guess I could say. So in that analogy, if you were doing a 10 rep set to failure, I don't think you could do 2 reps, take a long break, 2 reps, take a long break, 2 reps, and to total 10. But because that individual set is going to failure, it's a little bit different. Maybe as if like you did a sprint and you just all out sprinted until you hit the desired 170 beats per minute or something. It's not a perfect analogy, but I'm just saying, I think at least you're getting that stimulus of failure. The point is still, I could see it being the case. If a study came out and showed that, I wouldn't be like, wow, that's just crazy. But the evidence doesn't seem to show that. The evidence seems to show that spacing out sets is equivalent, if not actually slightly superior. So I've not seen anything to indicate that a per session volume is necessary, but I can certainly understand why it would have face validity and why you could make an argument for it if we didn't have literature disputing it.
And that's why, so the example that you brought up with the running, we cannot know for sure, obviously, whether there is something to just more acute, but more accumulated fatigue in that muscle group locally, within one bout, that is accomplishing something. And that's why I said that if I had to put my money on it, then that's what I would go for. But I didn't say it mechanistically just doesn't make sense, because we don't exactly know mechanistically what needs to happen. We just have good guesses. But it could be that after 2 sets, 3 sets, some things happen because of the more metabolic fatigue in the muscle that is accomplishing something. So it could be that there is a certain amount of work that you need to do in one session. But if I had to guess, I would say probably no. So yeah, I think, and the same thing could be, because it's all on a spectrum. So for example, if you did 10 singles, and all of them were close to failure, or maybe you try to mimic an actual 10 RM, very close to failure by, okay, so the first single is going to be further from failure, but about as far as the first rep of a 10 RM. And then the last one would be your actual 10 RM that you're lifting. Would that be as good as a 10 RM? Like doing a 10 rep set, very close to failure? Then I would put my money on no. Or would I put my money on that? I don't know. So, like that's what I'm talking about. Like we don't exactly, I don't know why I would put my money on that not being as good. It's an intuition. So that's why we are just kind of guessing here and trying to make our best guesses.
Well, to some extent, but I mean, again, there is data on it. I mean, there are studies showing pretty low volumes. Now, again, who are the participants, right? Usually it's not super advanced trainees, which I do understand. But again, going to that YouTube commenter, he had said something, I could probably pull it up, but basically he was saying that by having the one set, it allows you to train more frequently. But it's like, yeah, sure, but you're still looking at a certain volume per week. Like by that example, nobody should ever do more than one, and you can recover. Maybe even if you need more than 7 sets per week, you could say, well, I'm going to do one in the morning, one at night. So then I could do 14 sets per week. Like I just don't think, and again, the literature doesn't really support to that extent. Frequency beyond about 3 times per week doesn't really seem to be very beneficial. I think there is some literature showing double sessions. That I think there was one study showing some benefit and one showing that there wasn't much of a benefit. And I don't want to act like we have the definitive answer here, but I've just not seen anything to indicate that the maximum amount of frequency possible is helpful, and I've not seen anything to indicate that you need a per session volume. But generally, I just also wouldn't waste my time with one set per. Like, why would I do that? Why would I try to break up? If it's 3 sets, I'm just going to do them together. So, in practical terms, I think it's a little different.
Sorry. Yeah, and I think what Menno said is, which is pretty obvious, but we just haven't thought about it that way. That is basically a spectrum between rest periods and training frequency. Like at a certain point, rest periods become training frequency when it moves to another day. But right. and it would be interesting actually to do a vote with people on this. Like probably most people, I would guess, would say that doing, let's say, 1 set on 3 days would not be as good as doing 3 sets on 1 day. But then, okay, so if we go down, probably most of them would say that resting 4 minutes instead of 3 minutes is not a problem. 6 minutes instead of 3 minutes, not a problem. 10 minutes, then I would expect some people to say that that's not as good. Mm-hmm. Like 1 set morning, 2 sets in the evening. More people yet again to say that that's not as good, and then like the next day, them even more. And the other way around as well. Like at first we just break apart, like 10 sets. It's not only in one session. It's spread 2 ways. Then we can go even further and like, what if we pick apart the set itself? So like you do like clusters, but try to mimic that failure proximity. Maybe eventually we could even break apart like reps, like 1/2 of the rep, the other half of the rep. That's been studied like similarly. So like, 1 full range of motion rep is better than like 2 partials at 2 different parts of the movement. But yeah, so anyway, that it's just all very interesting, and I look forward to learning more about this.
I'll have to see what Brian answered. You said that's on a recent podcast they did?
Yeah, they both just said, oh, it's all individual, and they just moved on. Just kidding. Okay. No. No, they answered similarly, I think, as us.
So Brandon says, hi, Dave. I've been injured for the last 1.5 years. I'm now looking to put on muscle and gain weight. I was down to 117 pounds at 5'9" at one point. Now I'm about 126 pounds. Is there any point in throwing in Minicuts at all, or should I just keep gaining weight?
I'm going to be more crypto. First, you need to drink 1 gallon of milk a day. Oh, that was pretty bad. Anyway,
I've actually never. I've heard so much about Ripto, but I've never actually consumed his content. Other than I know he's like pretty basic with his recommendations there. So yeah, I mean, if you're 5'9", 126 pounds. I just can't imagine a situation where you are over fat and need to diet. Like I would just go into a long gaining phase. I'm honestly, Minicuts in general, I'm just not a huge fan of. I think they're fine if you mentally need a break. If you're really full, like I know Steve Hall implements them, and sometimes he's just so tired of bulking. But he's even said recently that he feels, I believe he said that he feels he may have wasted some time with the mini cuts. And because I don't really understand what you think is happening mechanistically there. Like you think, oh, well, now I'm going to have insulin sensitivity or something. I think honestly, anything physiologically that happens there is just going to reverse itself almost immediately. Like if you go from 170 and you're bulked up now to like 182, and you're like, okay, time for a mini cut, and you mini cut down to 178. I think by the time you get back to 182, you're going to be basically in the same situation you were before. I just think it's kind of a waste of time, again, unless you just need the break. Like if psychologically you need the break, totally fine. But I don't think there's some mystical benefit to mini cuts. I've not seen anything that makes me think that they're really that helpful. So in general, I'm just not a fan, but especially in this situation, like even I think that advocates of mini cuts would probably tell you in your situation, don't do it. You've been off for a year and a half. You are going to be in a great situation to gain more muscle and get whatever you lost back. I would not be mini cutting.
Yeah, so I'm gonna. So first of all, like, what was specifically his question? So like, he wants to gain, and then like, should he do mini cuts? Or
he's 117 pounds at 5'9". He was. Now he's 126. He's trying to get his muscle and strength back after a year and a half of being injured. Is there any point in throwing in mini cuts at all, or should I just keep gaining weight?
Okay. So then it's good because I'm gonna give a different perspective on this. I agree that mini cuts are often not needed, and I would also say that they are abused by a lot of people, either those that are fat phobic, or oftentimes the people that are the most interested in mini cuts are like I was when I was the most interested in this. It was because I was just looking for ways to kind of eat recklessly and give in to my really not great eating habits, or let those take the better of me or get the better of me, and just kind of get fat pretty quickly, but then always like have frequent enough opportunities to undo that. With that said, though, I think it can be used, especially for those that are good with slow and methodical bulking. I think it can be used as a strategic tool to prolong the bulk, and I think the key there is to just not get too high hopes from basically mini cutting, giving you the best of both worlds of staying very lean but also putting on a shit ton of size. So I think that's when people run into issues where, okay, so I'm going to gain for let's say 4 weeks, and then I'm gonna cut for 1 week, and I'm going to burn all the fat that I gained in those 4 weeks and just rinse, repeat. And then I'm just like gradually going to get huge. If you do that, then probably you're just going to end up the same size, like all throughout the year. So long as you're not doing that, but you do something like this is how I like to set it up: 2 months of gaining or something like that. And then like a week, 10 days of cutting. And it's not like an all-out crash diet. So it's not like a rapid fat loss protocol. It's something like, okay, in 2 months, we gained, let's say, 2 kilos. In that 1 week, 10 days, you're going to lose something like half a kilo, 0.7 kilos, something like that. So like you're still ending up at a net higher weight. And we can be confident that that's still conservative enough that you're just going to lose fat and nothing else. And, so if you're gaining for a long time and you're good with methodical gaining, let's say you gain for like a year, like if you have these, so in total, this would be like a 9-week cycle. In 52 divided by 9, that's a couple of these cycles. Like you're going to end up with markedly less fat. You're still going to put on a fair amount of fat during the bulk, but just not as much as you would normally. And I think that can also be like a good, like nice selling point to those that are starting their bulks at a body fat that they are not like 100% satisfied with. So they are having second thoughts that like, oh man, but like I'm already not like super lean. So how am I going to look like at the end of this bulk? So they are already defeating themselves mentally before they even start the bulk. I think for those, this can be a nice thing. So
So you think by doing them, once you get to the same weight, you're going to net less fat?
I mean, so probably your body weight is going to be a bit lower, but hopefully just body fat lower, and hopefully it's not going to compromise the amount of muscle that you gained. Because I mean, during any bulk, right? Like you're going to overshoot the actual like weight requirement where you would have to be if you just put on muscle, and that's inevitable. But I don't think by losing some of that, you're kind of compromising your muscle gains. So yeah, like if let's say every 10 weeks you're losing half a kilo of fat, then you have like, I don't know, 40 total weeks of gaining. Then that's 2 total kilos. So 2 total kilos is off from your eventual body weight, but that's all fat. And my hope and expectation would be that your lean mass gains would be the same. Would you?
So if somebody is, so let's say I had a client who is 2 years into lifting and he's 14% body fat, and he bulks up, and until he eventually hits 16% body fat and he's gained whatever amount of muscle. Are you confident that you could get him to diet from that 16% back down to 14% with no muscle loss? Like, this is like a related question, but I'm not saying you would do that with a mini cut, but I'm saying just in general, you've bulked for 4 months, whatever. He's now 16%. Do you think you get him down to 14% with zero muscle loss?
14%, no. But 15.7%, yes. so or 15.5, so something like that, I would be confident. So I think if those mini cuts that we inject in there are short enough and not like crazy aggressive.
Well, I'm not talking about the mini cut. Obviously, you wouldn't lose 2% body fat in mini cut. I'm saying a separate question that will tie into it. You have a client at 16%. He's only 2 years into lifting. Mm-hmm. Do you think you could diet that person down to 14% with no muscle loss?
Oh, yeah. You don't? Or
no, I do.
Oh, okay.
which is my point. Because if you think that, which if you have a client who's only 2 years into lifting, they should definitely maintain all muscle, right? So why then would you not have them, if they're at 14%, have them bulk up to 16%, gain that muscle, say, hey, there's no point in being beyond that, diet down to 14% and just do that. Like if you believe that you could get them down to 14% with no muscle loss, and then you could bulk them back up to 16%, they'd gain more muscle, diet them back down to 14%, 16%. This way, there's never any huge fluctuations. Like, why would you not do that?
So I would be totally cool with that as well, just to be clear. And so the reason, so this is not like the SSD Abel method. It's not like that at all. Mm-hmm. It's something that I just throw on the client's radar if I can see that they're just very uneasy about the whole prospect. So like, or not even client necessarily, just someone who is asking me like what they should do. And then like, you know, the person looks like leanish, like an athletic, healthy body weight. But like, if I tell them that, okay, I think you should gain, and then, okay, with that, how long is a productive gaining phase? I mean, that's something that should go on for a while. And then they're, oh man, but like, I'm going to get so fat by the end of it. Like even if I just put on a kilo a month, like if I do this for like 4 or 6 months or something like that, I mean, I wouldn't want to gain like that much fat. And then I'm saying like, well, you can throw in a mini cut like every 2 months, like you're going to mitigate it. So like if someone is like super lean and is fired up about starting a gaining phase, then I probably would omit the whole mini cut discussion entirely. If they are like super tied to their lean physique and they're like, oh man, I want to gain, but I like this look a lot, then maybe I would throw it in again. That like, well, you can prolong the, you know, the devolving of your physique into a softer shape. So I kind of like use it to fit people's psychology a little bit because I don't think it's detrimental necessarily. I think it's why not make them feel a bit better. But yeah, I would have no issue with just gaining longer and then cutting longer. That's what I would do personally.
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying before with like mentally, psychologically, if you need the break, if it makes you feel better, fine. Physiologically, I don't think, now I'm not saying it's going to hurt. However, I think it's really important that the trajectory is still like this and going up over time. Because going back to that example I gave you, I'm kind of framing the question that way because I would not recommend that to somebody. If they say, oh, I'm going to go 14 to 16%, 14 to 16%. Will you make progress if you're early enough in your training career? Sure. But I think that honestly, one of the worst things that Greg Doucette has done for the industry, not even counting like all like the supplement nonsense, whatever, is just this whole idea that you can gain or maintain or whatever at your way to your ideal physique. Like, I just don't think whatever your I shouldn't say your ideal physique, but whatever your natural potential would be. I just don't think that that's the way to do it. If you look at even like a Steve Hall, it's like, sure, he implemented Minicuts, but he got to a much higher weight than he was before. If you look at Jeffrey Very Schofield, much higher weight than he got before. I am sitting around like 195 these days, but I got up to 220 and hit personal bests. And for reference, and I mean, it's almost like an undeniable example. So when I was 170 pounds, my junior year of college, I had just gained 7 pounds of net muscle, like lean body mass, meaning bulked up like 20 some pounds, cut down, was the same leanness, 7 pounds heavier freshman year. Sophomore year, same thing, 8 pounds, right? So I'm clearly still at a position where I'm able to gain quite a bit. Junior year, I go into it, I'm like, you know what? I want to stay leaner. So I'm 170, I bulk up to 175. Surely I gained something. And then you'd think, well, you're not that lean. Surely you could lose 5 pounds with no muscle or strength loss. Well, I did like 4 of these cycles, 170 to 175, down to 170, up to 175, et cetera. And by the end of 6 months, I made no progress. Like just nothing happened. And so you're not talking to somebody who's super advanced. I'm significantly bigger now. So there was clearly more muscle to gain. And yet I did that. And I went from 7 pounds freshman year, 8 pounds sophomore year, 0 pounds my junior year. So I'm sure, obviously, like everything, there's individual variation, but I'm just not a fan of that method. I think because of my sophomore year, I had pushed up to like 185. And then when I cut down, whatever. So I was not getting up to new highs of strength and size that I had done before. And so the theory to me just does not work out.
Yeah. And I agree. And I would say that if I had to pick, I mean, I was wrong about multiple things. And by the way, it takes a big expert to say, I don't know, just so everybody knows. Just kidding. So I actually saw this in a Netflix series recently that was hilarious. But anyway, I mean, I was imitating Lane Norton, but okay. Anyway, why am I still talking about this? So yes, but the one thing I would say that I was the most wrong about, and looking back around 2019, 2020, I really just should have shut my mouth on this. Is the whole bulking topic, because I kind of jumped on that, like Greg Doucette bandwagon, and I haven't heard that from him. It's something that's been around for a long time, and actually, I think Eric Helms was one of the first people that I heard this from. Like just gain these like minuscule amounts of weight, and I honestly think that was one of those things, like with the like mechanisms of like how muscle is growing and how we need to train to maximize muscle growth, where I think we just don't exactly understand what a calorie surplus is doing to our like anabolism. So like, it's not just about the calories. I think like I would be fairly confident in making that guess once again, that it's not just about providing enough energy. Because if it was just about that, then yeah, like main gaining would work pretty well. But I think there's probably something actually Leo and Longevity, out of all people. I hate to reference him, but he said something in a video which at the time I was thinking like, yeah, actually that's an interesting way of phrasing it, but there might be something to this, that calories to muscle are actually almost like hormones. It's probably not quite like that, but I think there is something independent from the actual energy that a calorie surplus and going higher and higher in body weight is doing to how anabolic you are. So yeah, I think I think the bros were probably right. Like there is something to getting heavy and a bit fatter than you would want to be, and eating like a lot that is just good for anabolism. So yeah.